is being recorded. And then also, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat box during the session, but we'll also have time for Q&A at the end of the session, during which you're welcome to just raise your question and unmute yourself. And also feel free to show your video if you like. So my name is Charlotte. I'm a senior policy researcher at Nesta. And today I'm joined by 4 fantastic speakers. 2 of them are startup founders, Josh from Karakoram. We have Michael from Donaco, and then we're also joined by 2 third sector leaders. One is Gwyl from Save the Children, and we have Liz from Crisis. So I'll just go over the agenda for today. I'll start by giving a very short introduction and talk a bit more about what collaboration looks like. Then we'll hand it over to Josh and Michael, who will talk about their experience with working with their tech organization. Then Liz and Gwyl will give the third sector perspective and talk to us about why it's important for the third sector to work with startups. And then hopefully by the end of all that, you'll be very inspired to get started yourself. So we'll give a few tips on how you can get started, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So first things first, why are we here today? Well, it all started with a collaborative project between Nesta and Save the Children, which we embarked on over a year ago. And we really wanted to better understand why we're not seeing more widespread collaboration between startups and the third sector. So to better understand this question, we started with a research project to understand barriers to collaboration between both partners, and also scope the space and see where collaboration is already happening. And this resulted in a report that was published in the summer, in July. And this report is the first of its kind to describe startup collaboration in the third sector. We didn't have to do it alone. We had a lot of input from over 80 experts, both from startups and third sector representatives. And to really show that, sorry, I think someone is not on mute. So could everyone just make sure to mute themselves so that I don't have background noise? Great, thank you. So with this report, although collaboration can be difficult and is not yet widespread, we really wanted to show, first and foremost, that it can happen. So we included different case studies of third sector organizations who are already working with startups, including Save the Children, Children's Society, and many more. And important to note that this work was supported by an excellent steering group, including members of NCVO, Akivo, and UN Innovation Network. So what does collaboration look like? Well, we found out that there are many ways in which charities and startups can work together. And some collaborations can be light touch, where it involves an exchange of information or documents between the startup and a charity. For example, in the case of Asthma UK, who offered an asthma care plan to the startup Tiny Medical app so that the startup could develop an app for asthma patients. But then on the other end of the scale, there's also much more resource intensive types of collaborations, even to the point where third sector organizations, they develop their own venture. And an example here is Versus Arthritis, who have created a separate venture called Arthur. And this venture, it designs, manufactures, and sells tailored products for people with arthritis. Then in total, we've identified 9 different collaboration modes between startups and third sector organizations. And as I mentioned, they can range from sort of light touch collaboration modes, when the third sector organization offers free tools to startups, to much more substantial resource intensive collaborations, to the point where third sector organizations create their own startups. But in between, there's a lot of other collaboration modes. And important to note here is that when we spoke to third sector organizations, is actually the reason why they want to collaborate with startups is to increase their impact. And by working with startups in these various ways, we found that they can increase their impact in different ways. For example, by supporting startups with similar values and missions, or by being able to solve challenges more effectively by working with a startup and coming up with innovative solutions. So I don't have the time today to go over all of these collaboration modes, but just wanted to highlight a few and talk about the startup perspective in this. So we saw that some organizations, they set up co-working spaces for startups where startups can access desks, meeting spaces, either for free or for reduced rent. So pre-COVID, we saw that organizations like Friends of the Earth and Guys and St. Thomas Charity set up co-working spaces, although post-COVID, I'm not quite sure how this collaboration modes will adjust. And this is a really good way for startups to get to know certain organizations, but there are also some things to think about. For example, these co-working spaces, they can risk operating in isolation. So if you're a startup, a part of these co-working spaces, it's really important to make sure that you get enough airtime in front of senior decision makers. And more organizations are setting up accelerator programs, which are intensive cohort-based programs specifically to help startups through the fragile stages of growth. And in the UK, we saw that Alzheimer's Society and Children's Society, they set up different types of accelerator programs. And again, this can be a really good way to get dedicated expertise from third sector organizations. But for startups, it's important to really discuss the tailored support you need from these organizations and make sure that you can get that by participating in accelerator programs. And then the other challenge for startups is that in accelerator programs, they often are initiated within innovation teams. But then to run a pilot, for example, you'll need to engage with people outside the innovation team. And then really to get that commitment, that can take a longer time than trying to set up collaborations just with the innovation team. And the final type of collaboration I want to highlight is third sector organizations investing in startups. And here, startups become a portfolio of investees, and they typically receive additional business and tech support. Examples here are Cancer Research and UK. Cancer Research UK, and then also UNICEF Innovation. The challenge we saw here is that it can be difficult to align incentives between startups and third sector organizations, because third sector, they don't have a profit motive, so they may be looking for other ways to get a return on investment. And then the other challenge is really to get beyond the pilot stage. So you may have received investment to run a pilot, but then afterwards, it's really important to make sure you can get a longer term connection with the third sector. So this was really just a sneak peek really into the report. It features a lot of other examples and much more information. But today, we're really here to hear from the startups themselves. So right now, I'd like to hand it over to our two startup founders, Josh and Michael, to talk a bit about their startups and why they're working with the third sector. And then I'll ask you both a few questions. So Josh, could you please tell us some more about your startup?
Of course. Good morning, everyone. So just really briefly, my name is Josh Thomas. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Karakoram. So we're an award-winning developmental innovation consultancy we're incorporated in the UK and also Belize. We use engineering, design, and strategy to build solutions to the world's toughest challenges. And basically, we work with a wide variety of clients, including the private sector and governmental, but our core clients and projects are within the third sector. So by using engineering and rapid prototyping, kind of build to learn, build to scale strategy and agile production methods, we create everything from digital platforms, experimental policy, and even hardware and IoT solutions. In fact, very recently, we won the 2020 UNDP Global Innovator Award for a hardware IoT project through the Global Center in Singapore. So that's, I guess, a very brief overview of Karakoram and what we've been working on.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Michael, over to you. Could you explain some more about your startup? Is Michael still with us? Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I was on mute.
No worries.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to meet you. Thanks a lot for the intro. Before going really into what we do as of today, I just wanted to tell you sort of where we started at Donegal. We actually started at Imperial College London. I was a student, a master's student, studying engineering with management. And while commuting to one of my jobs, I kept reading articles about the Syrian refugee crisis. And I found myself often frustrated because I didn't know what to do about it. And it wasn't the first time. And I thought there must be a way to really harness this sort of state where people can have an intent, for instance, when they're reading something online, and mirror it with an immediate action, an immediate civic action. And this idea of mirroring intent and action really sort of connected or kept, I kept thinking about that concept. Fast forward a few years, I got to understand a bit more sort of how the sector works, and noticed that there was actually a lot of inefficiencies in the way charities were actually fundraising online. Charities tend to fundraise offline. It has been like that for many, many years. They're transitioning to digital, so there are inefficiencies. And what we basically set out to do at Donegal is really sort of to try to help charities to source donors efficiently online by doing three things. One is identifying where people have the original intent to donate online. Second is making sure that once we identify that point of intent, we ensure that the message that we would show on an advertising, for instance, is aligned with the content and the audience. And finally, that donors who want to donate have a frictionless way of actually donating. And by combining sort of those three main pillars, we've been able to work with major charities like UNICEF, Christian Aid, Crisis, DePaul, while significantly increasing donations made and reducing acquisition costs as well.
Okay, great. Thank you both for sharing that. I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen for a second so we can see everyone. There you go, that's better. So now, Josh and Michael, I'd just like to ask you a few questions about your experience working with the third sector.
Of course.
Sure.
So maybe to get started, how did you start working with the third sector and how did you initiate collaborations with the third sector? Josh, could you start, please?
Well, that's a big question. I've had a long relationship, specifically with the UNDP Global Center for about 6 years, and that's kind of the first point. Is I deeply believe in remembering that projects with the third sector often are long collaborations, and you need to maintain great relationships with them. Remember, they're always doing their best, even when things are difficult or get delayed. And then it's important for all of our collaborations with the third sector. I try to remember that we rely on them to set the challenge, the budget, the risk, and the safety threshold upstream, so that we can competitively bid for that downstream. And that's one of the most important ways that we initiate the collaborations, is by looking for these projects downstream that we believe we can competitively compete and win.
Okay. Yeah, and Josh, your startup, you're going to really work with the sector to develop or improve their services and develop pilots and so on. And Michael, your startup is a little bit different. You work with charities in order for them to improve their fundraising ability.
Yeah, so I think throughout the conversation, I think it's important sort of to separate, as you just did, sort of startups that will focus on helping charities fundraise more efficiently. So on the fundraising side, and other startups that work on the operational side, because these are sort of two different stakeholders in the charities and probably different ways of working with charities. In terms of sort of how, so I came directly out of university, didn't have much experience in the charity sector, so it was a big surprise for me. But that also meant that I didn't really know, or I didn't have any precedence in any other sector. Therefore, wasn't really surprised by any, or got to know over time sort of the challenges that may arise from working in that sector. In terms of initiating, for us, because we're working on the fundraising side, it's really about identifying the key stakeholders that can make the decisions. And we've basically, followed the standard sales approach, which is standard direct outreach, LinkedIn outreach, etc. Trying to speak to the right people. Then eventually, when we got to get a few clients on, referrals has been a key driver to actually getting to speak to the right people. And now we're going to start looking at sort of more marketing, outbound content, etc., to try to get inbound leads.
Okay. So in the past years, you've both gained a lot of experience in working with the third sector. So could you share what, in your view, is both the best thing, but also the worst thing about working with the third sector? Josh?
Wow, that's a great question. So as a professional in the innovation sector, I'm always searching for unsolved problems, and the third sector is like by far the holder of the largest number of unsolved problems on Earth, possibly outside of the aerospace sector. So the best thing about working with the third sector by far is the challenges I get to solve on a daily basis. They're fascinating, keep me coming into work, and they take me around the world when we're not dealing with COVID, of course. And they tie together elements of like engineering, design, archaeology, history, and travel into a single profession. So I love being something between like Q Branch and Indiana Jones. It's like the best job on Earth by far. But the worst thing is working with the third sector is a collision between an unstoppable force and an immovable object. The innovation sector is known for kind of fast, instinctual decisions, quick prototyping, and risk-taking. And this is sometimes good and sometimes bad. The third sector, however, is known for rules, culturally sensitive consideration, decision by committee, and careful half steps. And again, this is sometimes good and sometimes bad. These two groups could not be more diametrically opposed in terms of how they choose to address problems, and they aren't always great bedfellows or even great at understanding each other. So in this regard, the third sector can be both like the dream partner and also the nightmare partner to entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that definitely resonates with what we've seen in the report as well. How about you, Michael? Does that sound?
That really resonates with what I have as well in mind. Because I think it's a massive market. It's a market that's actually transitioning to digital, and with transition, there's a lot of things to do, but it's an overlooked market. So there's a lot of challenges involved. There's a lot of ways you can actually help the sector. So it is really stimulating on that front. And on top of it, you have the impact aspect of things. But on the flip side, as Josh mentioned, it's really the culture that is quite difficult to navigate. I think I've seen with COVID especially that there is a strong desire from the sector to try to reinvent itself. And that comes with sort of a change in their culture, trying to test things more quickly, being more sort of forward-looking, being more focused on performance as opposed to reach. That's more of a target marketing jargon. But yeah, so we're seeing that it's changing, but it's true that the culture is a big limitation. And also like decision making is often has to pass by trustees, has to pass by management. We've seen some cases creatives being approved by the CEO of the charity, which was a major charity. So there are a few blocks, I think, in the way charities are set up, but I have a feeling, and I guess because we have these types of conversations also, it's a testament that there is a desire to change and to progress.
And knowing what you know now, and the different collaborations you've already had with the particular organization, what would you tell yourself as a beginning startup founder? What do you wish you knew when you started, Josh?
Wow, that's pretty simple actually. For me, the thing that I really wish I knew when I got into this is the difference in how long we expect something to take in the startup world compared to the length of time the third sector needs to reciprocate on their end. I'm not joking at all when I say that for us, what we think of an hour is really more like a week for them. A day is a month, and a month is, I'm not joking, a year. We've actually had delays of that long for problems that in the startup sector seem like a month-long challenge. It really is a big dichotomy between the interpretation of timelines.
And you, Michael?
Yeah, from my perspective, I guess since I came directly out of university and started working in the sector, I didn't really have a point of reference with respect to other sectors. But I think one thing that I think is super important for founders is to really understand what needs or what problem they're actually solving for the charities. I think it took us a bit of time to really understand the sector and how sort of they think about the problem that they have. And now when we've mentioned inefficiency or opening up new audiences, etc., that's stuff that resonates with them. And that's a way we need to communicate to be able to make them understand sort of why we exist as a company. But the other thing is, I think, and that actually might be linked to my first point, but if you want to work with the third sector, I think it's important to understand what your mission is and how you align with your mission, with their mission. And I think that's key in getting anything through with the sector.
And maybe without getting too specific about any names or organizations, have you noticed that some organizations are maybe a bit easier to work with than others? And what is it about these organizations that make them better collaborative partners compared to others? You, Michael?
I've seen it's often the culture and the mindset. And I think there's a question in the chat. Is there some correlation between the size of the charity and how far time slows down in decision making? It really, really depends on the culture. We've seen big organizations that are really fast at taking decisions because they have that sort of test and learn framework and want to innovate. And we've seen very large charities that take a lot of time to actually get anything approved. And similar medium-sized charities, same thing, or small-sized charities can take ages or just don't have the right mindsets. So I think it really comes down to the culture, and it comes down to the trustees, it comes down to the management, and then it trickles down the organization. So it really, really depends. And I think instead of actually segmenting charities by size, which is something we do, I actually tend to prefer understanding how the organization works in terms of hierarchy and getting to speak to somebody internally. Okay, how does your organization work and what's your culture and how long does it take to take decisions, etc., to actually get a sense of how quickly we can actually work with this partner.
And you, Josh?
For me, it comes down to three key metrics. It's the ones that are easiest to work with are third sector organizations that are empowered to deliver solutions, not just discussions. I've seen that to be a problem sometimes. Sometimes it's just about talking about something as opposed to solving it. Third sector groups that are empowered to take risks and importantly have group directors above them that can guard them from politics and protect the entrepreneurial leaps taken with their partners, with their contractors. And I also find it to be unbelievably critical to work with groups in the third sector that have experience in the private sector, even the most basic experience in the private sector, understanding that contractors like us, startups like us, we're not just for good, we're also for profit. We have stakeholders, we have salaries to pay, and it's easy to forget that like a quote unquote like small delay by third sector standards, it really is the difference between a company staying afloat and a company going under. And I think a lot of people who haven't worked in the private sector just really believe that money is not a thing. Like if you could just, the delay is a delay, there's not a lot of thinking about what monetary reality that has for the private sector. And again, I do want to kind of call out some people who are particularly good at this. I mean, I think there are some groups out there that are particularly trying and succeeding. So in my opinion, for instance, the UNDP Global Center in Singapore is the gold standard, in my opinion, for making huge strides for this. I think what Brad and Janine, along with their team, Minai, Armin, Callum, and many others have done is really nothing short of amazing. Brad has, in my opinion, really made the Global Center into a hub of excellence and innovation. And I personally hope that it becomes the standard for the entire UN network as well as the third sector. I think a lot of groups could learn a lot from what the Global Center is doing.
Okay. I know we've discussed a few barriers to collaboration, like different timelines, different mindset, different cultures. What, in your view, has to be done to boost collaboration? Michael?
I just wanted to add one point on the previous question. I think also, like my controversial view a bit is that I think charities are also a bit limited by public perception. In that I would actually rather see a charity be run like a business, and actually have senior management in place that have commercial experience and that have bigger salaries, because I know that, you know, if they have the right experience up there, it will trickle down across the organization, and then they'll be more efficient, well, hopefully, in how they actually operate the charity. And we've seen that with a few charities, like where the CEO has definitely experience working in the private sector, may be getting a bigger salary, but at the end of the day, the charity is more operational. So that's sort of one other point that I think is important to highlight and might be a block, is actually public perception. If you tell them a CEO has 200K or 150K salary, they'll be like, whoa, why is that happening? You're a charity.
Couldn't agree more, Michael. Couldn't agree more. I mean, you see that again, Brad at the Global Center, Chris with UNICEF Innovation. These guys came from the private sector. They are entrepreneurs. They're global standard entrepreneurs in their own right. And that is what it takes to push this whole sector forward.
Yeah.
So one way to boost collaboration would be the third sector adopting a bit more of a commercial mindset, so to say.
Yeah, I think if you think of a charity, I think at the end of the day, it's a vehicle basically allowing people, and that's again my perspective, it's a vehicle allowing people that are sort of going on about their daily lives to support specific causes. And I think this vehicle, unfortunately, before it had, I'm talking on the fundraising side, it had abilities to actually fundraise from its own channels. You know, door to door is very charity. Well, a lot of it was charity focused, street fundraisers, events, and things like that. But now it really needs to adapt to digital. And when they're actually adapting to digital, they're competing against Nike, they're competing against Adidas, like all the cars, etc. So they actually have to, in a way, step up or learn how to run more like a business on the fundraising side. Because otherwise they're not going to be able to compete with the big brands, because they're competing for the same eyeballs at the end of the day.
Yeah. From my point of view, kind of this is echoing a lot of what we've already said. But for me, one of the biggest things that can be done to support more collaboration, it's very clear from the private sector. There needs to be a clear financial incentive structure for projects. Sometimes I get the sense that many in the third sector don't understand, like truly don't get that we can't work for free. That folks on my team have mortgages, other bills to pay. We operate on tight margins already in order to offer competitive pricing. And the analogy that I always love to give is that I would really encourage those in the third sector to think about the future of startup third sector collaboration, similar to how NASA works with their contractors. You know, NASA sets the high level criteria, the requirements in terms of goals, deliverables, and safety, but they don't get involved in designing everything downstream. In fact, they're uniquely unsuited for that. They let private companies like ILC Dover that makes spacesuits, Boeing that makes the spacecraft themselves, and SpaceX go and innovate. And NASA offers real budget for engineering solutions at a global standard. So I'd encourage the third sector to start thinking in a similar fashion in order to unleash the power of private sector startups.
Okay, I think on that note, that is a great transition to hear from our third sector leaders about their perspective on third sector collaboration. Let me just share my screen again so that they could talk a bit more about their organizations before we have a similar panel-like discussion with the third sector leaders. Thank you very much, Josh and Michael. It was really useful insights. So, as I mentioned, we have Gwil and Liz joining us from Save the Children UK and Crisis. Gwil, over to you.
Hi everyone, thanks Charlotte, and thanks Josh and Michael. That's some fascinating insights and stuff which I'm hopeful we're going to get a chance to kind of elaborate on. Yeah, just to give a bit of a flavour to those of you who don't know Save the Children, we currently work in over kind of 100 countries across the world, and last year we reached almost 40 million children directly through our programs. I mean, in terms of the relevance for this conversation, I guess we operate a kind of theory of change, and central to that, are core components of that are partnership and innovation. So very much in our DNA around collaboration with different actors and trying to do more across sector. Over the last sort of 10 years, we've had a kind of strategy, particularly at Save UK, but across the movement as well, around looking to create, host or incubate different initiatives. So we've set up kind of 3, which I mentioned on the slide, ELRA, Start Network and Leadership, a Humanitarian Leadership Academy, each of which has a different focus, and they've been made outside of with the intention of being outside of the Save the Children organisation. So each of them have spun off now, very much kind of looking at how they can be global goods for the sector and the world at large. And we're continually looking to kind of create new forms of collaboration, hence the reason we partnered with Nesta to do the original research. So yeah, I'll leave it there for now, but then looking forward to the questions.
Okay, Liz, could you tell us a bit more about Crisis and the Venture Studio?
Yeah, of course. So firstly, thanks for having me. Brilliant to be here and talking about this, and absolutely loved Josh and Michael's comments. So can't wait to get stuck into a conversation around those. I work for Crisis. Crisis is the national charity for homelessness in the UK, and every year we support about 8,000 people out of homelessness. And what I love about our charity is we want to put ourselves out of business. So we actually don't want to exist, and we shouldn't exist in the long term, because homelessness is absolutely preventable. And we've actually written a plan on how to go about ending it. And the reason we're interested in entrepreneurship and innovation is actually it provides us a new route to accelerate an end to homelessness. And it's something that hasn't really fully been harnessed by the charity before. So we're actually quite early in our mission in comparison to Save the Children. The Venture Studio has only just been established. And essentially the Venture Studio is a centre for us to build our own startups, to invest in startups, and to collaborate in tackling problems within the sector. I guess what's unique about us is that we're really keen to make sure lived experience is part of every aspect of the studio. And what that essentially means, because I realise there are lots of terms thrown around in the third sector and in the world of entrepreneurship, is that we actually want those who are impacted by the problem areas to be involved. So those who've experienced homelessness to actually be involved in the centre right from top to bottom. So that's really important for us. And I know that that's an area where startups often struggle to get links to, is actually the user groups. And that's something, weirdly, me and Michael have met before. We were both at Imperial College London, I in their entrepreneurship centre, and Michael was one of the startups we supported. And what was really clear to me is we had these super talented, smart students in working on these amazing innovations, creating new types of materials. But what they lacked was the connection to really thoroughly understanding the issues and connection to the users. And that's something that I think through having a central contact point, such as the studio, we can hopefully create for those really ambitious, young, talented entrepreneurs who want a route in. Our plan is obviously we're mission led, so we're doing this to end homelessness, but we also want to use this as an opportunity to generate new income for the charity. So we're combining mission and money in our work. And what's really key for me is that this is a collaboration. So I am looking for us to work with industry, with other charities, with academic institutions, to sort of work in a very activist, collectivist way on this. So we're very commercially focused, and before I get into that, actually, I could start talking about why I feel we're more commercially focused than others, but I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Charlotte.
I made the classic muted mistake as well. So thank you very much. Yeah, I would just like you to just reflect on some of the things that Josh and Michael said. It would be really great to hear your perspective on some of the issues they raised. Will, is there anything that really stood out for you?
I mean, just to echo Liz's comments, I mean, yeah, it was fantastic insights from both Josh and Michael. Nothing surprised me in what they've said. I think the things that stood out the most for me were around, I think, two pieces really. One is around the kind of the current framing that, yeah, we're kind of very bad bedfellows at the minute. So I think Josh mentioned that the unstoppable force and the immovable object, and I think that is something that anyone that's involved in this space at all would recognize. I think to kind of give you some empathy, I guess, even within the third sector, we find that kind of immovable object element very difficult. But I guess that's part of what we're here to sort of talk about and look at, try and find different ways to experiment to try and break down some of that, because some of it's very useful. So, you know, charities have built up a way of doing things, but also they have got some common approaches that are very kind of effective in the way that they do, but they don't necessarily lend themselves to try and experiment with new ways of doing things. And the second point that really jumped out to me was, Michael, your point around linking and speaking to the right people, and also recognizing that, particularly in large, I mean, it's probably true of smaller charities as well, but large charities almost tend to be, or can be, like 3 or 4 organizations in one. So you can have you know, your fundraising divisions and your programs divisions, and they can be almost like they speak a different language to one another and what they're looking at. So it's incredibly important that you find the right links and you find the right decision makers. But equally, and I think what Liz and Ellie are doing at Crisis is the third sector, we need to be looking at ways of making the mechanisms and the entry points easier, so that you don't have to then search around. And I mean, we've had lots of situations with, say, the children, where we've been trying to work with startups, and the initial contact's really optimistic, it's moving quite quickly, and then it hits a blocker because it goes to a different part of the organization, and they're kind of, you then have to either resell it or it just doesn't go anywhere, and it becomes really, those delays that Josh was talking about become just ridiculous. So yeah, those are the two. I mean, I could go on, I'll let Liz talk, but those were the two that kind of really jumped out for me.
Yeah, what about you, Liz?
Yeah, so for me, I absolutely love the idea of the fact that we have these this massive unsolved problems, and that really excites me. Actually, I think there is a whole massive unsolved problems within the sector that absolutely need that startup mode of working, that intervention. But I just think, as I mentioned before around the language, everyone speaks different language. So you have kind of the language of startups over here, the language of the third sector, and I'm new to the third sector, so I'm still getting on board with that. So I think that there is, the role our teams can definitely play is a translator, but that doesn't solve the problem of making it embedded across the organisation. And as Will was saying, the reality is that teams can be quite segregated within charities. So not only should our teams provide a route in, they also need to integrate this work. And it's actually our role to advocate the importance and impactfulness of this work in a really down-to-earth way, which, you know, someone who's working in frontline services can understand how it will impact their work for them for the better in the future. So I think that's the role our team should be playing, not only in sort of, you know, having the test and learn fun, the innovation culture, it's also about being advocates for this work within our own organizations. Something that really resonates is around the commercial nous and the way in which charities work for me as well. So I think we've been lucky in the establishment of the studio. I've seen there's a question about this around the balance of mission and money. Our team, I'm responsible for the charity's existing businesses. as well as this development. So I think that puts our team, we frame our team within that commercial environment already. So we're already thinking around mission and profit and how we can combine the two. But that's because of the work that's come before me and the fact that my director has commercial experience and she understands both worlds. So I think it really absolutely matters, the senior leadership you have. And I think you need that direct route. Otherwise, it makes those conversations at a senior management level and at a trustee level quite challenging. And I think that's the thing which really resonated with me is we need to be the kind of the forerunners in creating the structures and the ways of working to share within the sector, because otherwise this is going to take a long time to get right. I think we're on a long journey, but for me, I think it's about us shouting about our successes a little bit more as well. I think that's what's been brilliant about the Nesta report is actually, I think this work has been fairly hidden. You don't have many charities investing in this. This is seen as a really risky area, but actually the narrative just needs to be changed on it. There's a lot of opportunity to engage with new types of supporters to make them feel more active in the way that they're supporting charities. So there's a lot of positive stories that aren't being told at the moment that could be and could make other charities feel more confident about engaging in this work. So there's some thoughts.
Okay, nice. And yeah, both of your organizations have been really sort of pushing this space of trying to work with startups. So could you just explain a bit more about why, from your perspective, it's important for tech organizations to work with startups and why we need to do more to really boost this space? Gwil?
Yeah, thanks. So the answer will probably differ from different parts of the organization, but I'll speak from me personally, but also from my experience within Save the Children. So I mean, it comes down to a fundamental, which is that we believe that that we need to have a diversity in the ecosystem. So there needs to be a different types of actors with different perspectives and different value add in order to create kind of positive disruption. But also by having that diversity, it creates a different type of creativity and different types of innovation that Liz mentioned and Josh and Michael have already spoken about. But ultimately for Save the Children, we believe that would then also increase the impact that we have and that we and other actors will have for marginalized communities and children. So we've been trying to explore that through different types of collaboration. So as I mentioned, we've created, I guess, humanitarian type startups from within, but also we're trying to look to push the conversation and experiment with different modalities around how we can actively engage with startups. So I mean, Save the Children has a kind of federated structure. So our kind of colleagues in Save the Children Australia have recently set up an impact investment fund, which we kind of talk about very briefly in the Nesta report, and that started this year. So we're really trying to sort of test out new ways of doing things. Obviously, what Liz and Nelly are doing at Crisis, there's a Mercy Call Ventures have also done a kind of venturing piece. So we really want to do that primarily because, as has already been talked about, that kind of clash of cultures, there's trade-offs to be had, but there's also a huge amount of influencing that one can do to the other. So that kind of adaptive, agile mentality, and sort of test and experiment, learn and rebuild. That's something that we want to see more of in the third sector. So it allows us to have less formulaic but more effective capacity if it's not just the kind of traditional incumbents doing the same thing that they've always done in kind of incremental changes.
And what about you, Liz? You only recently started the Venture Studio. What's really the rationale behind it, and what is some of the reactions that you've received from either inside the organization or externally about this initiative?
It's all very negative. Everyone wants us to stop immediately. I'm joking. I think what's been brilliant is actually the support we've had from a really wide range of people. And what's been brilliant actually is Amy, who's on the call with us as well from our team. So we've got Amy and Ellie here today. Hello, team. We've had some really interesting conversations with investors. So you'll know that impact investment has significantly risen over the last few years. And I think now is the perfect opportunity to basically leverage that investment into the right solutions. So Crisis, like I said, we've written the plan to end homelessness. We have deep expertise. What we need are more agile ways of getting to that end point. And in reality, startups can be a lot more nimble than kind of the beasts that are charities in the way that they exist at the moment. So I think there's something around embracing a new way of working, and people absolutely see that the kind of need to bring together the expertise, the insight, the users, and those who can work much more rapidly in tackling those solutions. Will mentioned diversity. This is a really important point to me, actually, is that in terms of not diversity in action, but also diversity in profile. And charities are still really undiverse. And I'm not saying the entrepreneurship sector is much better, especially the investment community, but I think this is also an opportunity for us to get different types of people engaged, and different individuals who wouldn't necessarily be working with charities traditionally. So I think there's an opportunity to disrupt the sector also in the, we know that by having more diverse individuals engaged in our work, it will make it stronger and more impactful and more effective. And I think that there's something the startup community can bring. So that's one of the reasons we've made a commitment to diversity in terms of the businesses that we work with. I think that can hopefully bring forward the sector in a slightly different way as well. But I have to say, overall positive reactions from most people, and I think just really excited to see what the opportunity is. We've still got to prove ourselves, so watch this space.
Okay, about to wrap up this section, but Will, do you have any sort of final words of advice for startups who would be interested in working with Save the Children?
Don't stop. Would be the first thing. Please don't stop. Words of advice. I mean, you can kind of see it happening now. I think hopefully the Nesta piece, the research piece that we've done really does kind of help. I think Liz mentioned kind of bubble up the activity that's been happening, but there wasn't much kind of transparency to some of that in terms of people being able to see visibility wise. I think, I mean, in terms of what to do next, I mean, get in touch if it's with me or with Liz or with anyone. Keep trying to sort of knock on the door. We are doing a lot more. So I think from the third sector side, or from organizations like Save, we are actively looking at how we can create and look at different modalities and mechanisms to try and build these collaborations, understanding that they're going to be incredibly difficult. But I think for a startup, I think actually Michael's point earlier on around really think about what your mission is and what is the problem that you may or may not be solving for the third sector, or the kind of the people that organization is trying to affect. So for us, like crisis affected populations, what is the actual solution that, and therefore how can you look at creating a shared goal or shared goals around that? Because I think it also comes down to the language. So hopefully these mechanisms will help be a bit of a translator between the two, but understanding each other's language and understanding more from the third sector side, how we can understand more commercial, but equally how we can help translate some of our internal kind of acronyms, particularly for startups. I'll leave it there, but I could go on.
Okay, thanks. And Liz, you also still have a message for startups. Let me just share my screen again. Okay, there we go.
So this is our request, I guess, to anyone who is working in a startup and wants to work with us. So here you can sort of find our follow-up details and information. What I'd say is we're not looking just to work with startups that would see themselves as already having a social impact. Actually, we're more interested in finding startups who have the relevant technology, the relevant products and services that could potentially disrupt our problem areas. So actually the comment about how you articulate your problem, or the problem that you're solving, it doesn't matter to us if you're already thinking, if you've already kind of shaped your proposition in a social impact. We want you to come to us with the right solutions. So yeah, I think just starting a conversation, having open conversations, and also being open to being challenged on the way in which you're framing the problem. So I think the language point has been discussed quite a bit, but it can be really make or break for whether you get that internal buy-in, it seems, within this sector. So I think just being open to being challenged on your understanding of the problem area by those who do, understand it pretty well. But I'd also say that I really love the idea of not giving up because, but I think startup founders know that better than anyone. I think startup founders tend to be the most resilient individuals who really don't give up and will go through a whole variety of different offers before they nail it. So actually, I don't think I need to tell you don't give up, but to use that startup resilience to really make sure you get that inroad into a charity, because we are changing, we need disrupting, we'll get there eventually.
Okay, so now just for the final few minutes, just want to tell those who've been inspired to get started themselves to really call out to please do check out the reports. In the report, we share tips for startups, but also third sector organizations. And important to note here as well is that it's not just up to startups or individual third sector organizations, but we definitely also saw that there's some barriers that are at play in the third sector as a whole. So in the report, we also call for some sector level changes, and it's important for different organizations to come together to really enable changes that would facilitate more startup collaboration in the sector. So like I said, I'd like to encourage you to have a look at the report. It can be downloaded for free on the Nesta website. We really also want to build a community in this space. So as a starting point, we've created a LinkedIn group for anyone who's interested to join, and hopefully that will lead to new connections being made and people to be aware of collaborative opportunities. And like Gwyl and Liz mentioned, do not hesitate to get in touch, because we really want to see more progress happening in this space. And the starting point is just for people to know about it and to know each other. And everyone's very passionate and excited about this. So don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll do what we can to try and help. So we have a few minutes for Q&A. Let me have a look at the chat. Feel free to post any more questions. I saw there's a question from Adrian about how these activities are being perceived by charity supporter base and investors to startup. So maybe let me ask the startup founders, Josh and Michael, how is working with the sector organization, how is it perceived by some of the investors that you've worked with? Josh, I saw you unmute yourself, so go ahead and answer.
Very, very positively, because again, we don't work exclusively with the third sector. We've never claimed to be permanent do-gooders. We don't set policy, we just solve them. And again, the kind of challenges that are set upstream by the third sector are so ambitious, so creative, and the stories that come out of them are so clear in a way. It, in my experience, has attracted a pretty wide variety of investors, not just impact, pretty much across the spectrum. Because generally speaking, again, I love to equate aerospace, what NASA does with Boeing or SpaceX to what we do here. There's a lot of technologies that can be spun out of the work we do that is of interest across a huge variety of sectors. It's the opportunities, the insight, and the structure that the third sector creates upstream that enables us to speak with investors downstream.
From my perspective, I think we're actually fundraising at the moment, and I found that it's actually really important for us to find investors. Basically, not all investors will be right for us. And I think that's something that founders need to be aware of. We're working in the nonprofit sector. We are here to make money, but we're also here to actually have an impact. And I think it's really key to find those investors that will enable you to scale commercially, but also will understand that you're not necessarily, although it would be nice to have $1 billion company, but that's not sort of the end goal for Doneco. It's also to have an impact. I think really mirroring both your missions is quite important, and finding an investor that actually understands that is important as well.
Okay. Also, Amir left a message about something they're doing at Big Society Capital. Yes, Amir, feel free to jump in and
yes. Hi, sorry, I don't have my camera on because I'm talking via mobile phone and didn't know quite how to jump in. But thank you for picking that up. Just a quick, yeah, I think just to let everyone know, just in terms of, if people don't know who Big Society Capital are, we're a kind of wholesale bank that works at growing the social investment market here in the UK. We've actually had a number of conversations with the crisis team and some of the other ones, so it's good to hear familiar voices in that sense. We're launching a program in January which doesn't exactly tie with everything that's said here, but I think it's the first step towards this, which is around how we could basically, as core for ideas, get more innovation within the sector, but try and pair together fund managers, social investors with kind of charity groups. And what we're trying to provide is a upfront 30K grant funding to almost pay for the development costs of such ideas at kind of the early stages of it, because we understand one of the blockers is that really kind of like early stage development money to kind of get kind of ideas on paper, or kind of like how we do that. And that's one of the blockers, as well as some kind of pro bono support from our team here of up to 6 days of individual supports from like the various kind of people that work within Big Society Capital. It probably isn't, I'm not doing it justice in a short space of time in this very kind of rushed way, but it'd be something I'd be happy to share with them. If there's some way of sharing it with attendees and the network here, I can definitely like reach out if that's the best way. But by all means, also add me on LinkedIn and various sources to kind of like have further discussion. But we are hoping it is a program which we can do more of, talk about more of in the new year, and we'd love to kind of like feed into this wider discussion that's taking place here as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, that's exactly the sort of opportunities that would be great to share in this LinkedIn group that I talked about. So feel free to join it. I can send it around to all the attendants as well. So happy for you to become a part of
Thank you.
Community. There's 1 more minute for any final comments or questions. Anyone like to add anything before we round it up? Okay, well, I think we've had a really, really great discussion, and thank you so much to all our speakers for joining. Yeah, it's really nice to see so many people passionate about this space, so definitely keen to keep the conversation going. And happy Global Entrepreneurship Week, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Charlotte.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Thank you.